Tell us why. They get to eat all they want, go to sleep in through the winter, wake up skinny in the springtime. Yeah, it's true. What else? Anybody ever dream of being an animal? You don't have to be it for the rest of your life. If you could be an animal for one day, what would you like to be? Cheetah. Rolf says a cheetah. I can think of a few things about a cheetah, but why would you want to be a cheetah, Rolf? Fastest, yeah, fastest land animal, and Rolf wants to be the fastest. Unbelievable. He's got a competitive spirit, doesn't he? Where does that come from? I can see Vicky the mama bear. Was a good. Oh, you stole. All right. So Karen and Matt both would like to be an eagle. All right. Karen, why would you want to be an eagle? Just fly. Yeah. All right. If we ever see Karen up there, we'll know what she's doing. Dreaming. So Karen wants to fly. What about you, Matt? Same dream. All right. Sharing dreams. Yeah. I think there's all kinds of birds. It'd be fun to be flying around up there, but an eagle, yeah, power, soaring, all that. Anybody else want to go? Oh, Ollie, a falcon. Oh, all right. Why a falcon? Fly high. She wants to soar above those lowly eagles, even higher. All right. Is anybody else? I mean, so we've got eagle. We've got these powerful animals, bear. How about a sheep? Nobody wants to be a sheep. That's interesting, isn't it? I know I've asked lots of people what kind of animal they want to be. Nobody's ever said, "I want to be a sheep," and yet that's what we're compared to in Jesus' illustrations. We are the sheep. We like the idea of eagles and falcons and cheetahs and bears because there's a strength and an independence and the ability to really experience the world around you. Sheep, we often just think of as dumb and helpless, and that's what Jesus wants us to identify with. Is that offensive to you? I mean, after thinking about your favorite animal, what you want to be, for Jesus to say, "No, you be a sheep." How's that feel? It's accurate. Well, it certainly is accurate. It's Jesus talking, right? This is he knows how we are, and he knows which animal traits we portray well. There are some interesting things about sheeps, sheep, sheepas. Australia's official guide to sheep rearing lists some advantages and disadvantages about sheep. Some of the disadvantages I think we're very familiar with. Sheep are helpless. That picture is a picture of a sheep. This happens often in the flock. In fact, they have a lot of, I guess, community announcements. If you see a sheep laying on its back, please stop and flip it over because they get stuck on their back like a turtle. And if they don't get back over, they will die within a few hours. You talk about helpless. Uh, yeah, you could kill one easy when it's standing on its feet. But when it's on his back, it's got his belly out there. Anything could come along. Lord, the what? Cast sheep? I don't know. I don't know what a cast sheep is. Ah, what it what does that mean? Oh, that's what they're called when they roll over. A cast sheep. Interesting. So yeah, kick it over. All right. Now, if you guys are studying sheep, I'm expecting some big things. That was a good one. Cats, sheep. I better write that down. Yes, they are very helpless, these cast sheep especially. They're not very adaptable. If you are going to take some sheep from one environment to another, it's going to take them a while to get to where they can survive. And they're never going to be able to survive on their own. Uh, for example, they get rolled on top of themselves and can't get up. They're also there's all kind of predators out there, but they also get a lot of parasites. So it's not just the big things that get them, it's the little things that can get them. You can't just leave a sheep out and not take care of it. You've got to take it to food. You've got to take it to water. You've got to cut that hair because it'll just keep growing, and they will die with too much hair on them. A lot of disadvantages. They're short-sighted. They can see about 6 feet well in front of them. Can't see very far off. So you can imagine what kind of trouble they get into. And when they get away from all of their friends or the shepherd, they don't know where they are. They're short-sighted. They're fragile. It would be one thing if they were, clumsy and short-sighted and, dependent, but also they fall, they break easier than a lot of other animals. So there's a lot of disadvantages to being a sheep. What are some of the advantages? Well, the same guide on rearing sheep. Of course, why do people raise sheep? There must be some advantage to having them. Wool. Wool is the main reason, right? You can also eat them. They're delicious. What did you say? Yeah, they are. They are very good. If you haven't had sheep, I recommend it. Other advantages: they have this herding instinct, and that is a good thing because they are wanting to stay together all the time. And that makes it a little bit easier for the shepherd. Now, again, they can get separated, they can get lost. And it's not always just because they're dumb. It's because they get separated and they don't know where to go, and they're too weak and dependent to find their way back. They are very good at reproducing. They reproduce quickly and they grow fairly quickly. That's an advantage if you want to be raising sheep. They are obedient, at least they can be taught to obey. That's one of the things we might look at today, speaks about the sheep hearing the voice of the shepherd. Well, that shepherd can call his sheep and they can respond and they can do what that shepherd asks for them to do. So even if they are, that 6 feet or more away, they can still hear the voice of the shepherd, and they want to be safe, and they learn that shepherd is going to be one that they can trust. And they are trusting animals. We are trusting creatures also. And like sheep, sometimes we trust the wrong thing. That happens to sheep, but it takes them a while to learn who is worthy of trust. But sheep have a trait where they are very good at facial recognition. Some of the recent scientific studies involving sheep flocks and shepherds is that they recognize faces. So when that shepherd gets close enough, they know who it is. I'm sure they could recognize one another using the same thing. I mean, you get those sheep there together. I can't tell one from another, but they can. They're very good at it. And you could see how that might be helpful for a herding animal to tell who's who in the family group, who is trustworthy to follow, and things like this. So there are advantages to being a sheep if we have a good shepherd. And that is what we're going to be looking into today. Chapter 10 starts out with a familiar phrase we see Jesus say a lot: truly, truly. It's interesting that they decided to put 10 here. I guess they decided they had to put a chapter somewhere. In most cases, and I would argue in this case as well, when Jesus says truly, truly, it is a continuation of something that he's already been teaching. So he is saying this truly, truly for emphasis. So we kind of have to remember what's chapter 9 about. so that we understand where Jesus is headed with this. So he says, truly, truly, but the last verse in 41, remember chapter 9 was the healing of the blind man. And in the last verse of 41, he says, if you were blind, well, you know what, let's go back a little bit further. Verse 39, Jesus says, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees heard him. He heard these things and said to him, are we also blind? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying. Well, he already said that they were blind. It would make sense that after he's making these statements, they don't exactly understand what he is talking about. Got some more students coming in. So if we read those first 5 verses on the heels of chapter 9, there's a couple of things that will happen. You'll realize that he is speaking to the Pharisees. And these Pharisees, he is telling them to expect that the sheep that belong to Jesus are going to follow him and not them. There might be sheep that follow them. There might be people who listen to their voice, but not Jesus's sheep. And he is, when he's speaking about these robbers and these thieves, as we put the two together, it seems those people would be the Pharisees, as he is describing them here. So we might learn that thing, or we might be more like the Pharisees, like those who are present. As Jesus is saying, giving verses 1 through 5, as we read here, what they are hearing is a string of facts. He is telling them things that they already know. These were common things that anybody would know. So you might be more like the Pharisees if you understand these things and say, okay, yes, this is true. Yes, this is true. Yes, this is true. Why are you telling us this? So we can get it from a couple different perspectives here. From the Pharisees' perspective, and as we go along, we'll begin to understand more what Jesus is talking about. In these first 10 verses, where he begins to identify himself with the shepherd and the door, he's actually talking about 2 different kinds of sheepfolds. There is a sheepfold that was common and understood that existed in the village or near the village. And there was also one that was different, a sheepfold that was in the country. In the first 5 or 6 verses there, the sheepfold that he is talking about includes several flocks. Did you notice that? Several shepherds go and bring their sheep there, and then each shepherd will come and call his sheep. So you've got several flocks here belonging to different shepherds. This would be one that was near a village. So the shepherds would come in and they would all bring their flocks into this courtyard, usually stone. They usually have a gatekeeper at night so the shepherds can go get some rest. And the gatekeeper was the one who would watch the sheep overnight. In the morning, each shepherd would come, the gatekeeper would recognize who that shepherd was, and then the shepherd would call out to his flock, and his flock would follow them. Again, these are facts that they would be familiar with. They would see this in their day-to-day life as they walked past, perhaps, the courtyard where the shepherds kept their flocks. So that is what we see here in these first 6 verses. Now the next 4 verses where he talks about the door. That is going to be a sheepfold that is out in the country. Maybe this shepherd is too far from town to get his sheep back. Maybe he wants to stay out there for some reason, but the shepherd and his flock are going to be the only ones in that type of not courtyard, but penned in area. It's that shepherd's job to watch his own sheep and make sure that nothing comes into that pen, whatever that would look like, whatever danger there might be, and whatever defense there might be where he is keeping his sheep. So 2 different types of sheepfolds. So as we think about this, these sheepfolds, in the first 5 verses, what is the flock? What does the flock represent? Maybe what is the sheepfold? Because we said there are several flocks here. So yeah, let's think about this. What is this sheepfold that the shepherd is calling a flock out of? Okay, I heard the world. Certainly, the world in Jesus' time, his world, who he is speaking to, is the Jewish nation, right? And remember, he is speaking to the Pharisees, and he's reminding them that I am going to be calling my sheep. My sheep are going to listen. So in this big sheepfold where all these flocks are kept, Jesus is calling out those who will listen to him. Now, this isn't the first time he said things like this, and we'll look at some verses in a little bit. But at this time, this sheepfold are the Jewish people. Now, there will be a time in the future when that sheepfold includes Gentiles as well. In fact, if you look down ahead in verse 16, he speaks of other sheep who would hear his voice. He is talking about us, Gentiles. I don't know if there's any Jews here. The majority of us, I believe, are Gentiles. We're a part of that flock who hear Jesus' voice and come out from the entire world, right? So we get that picture there about who these sheep are. So the sheep who listen to Jesus' voice, who are those people? Yeah, well, that would be today. What about as Jesus is talking? For Christians today, when Jesus is speaking, it would be, you might describe them as Christians, followers of Jesus, right? Those who listen to him, those who obey him, those are the ones who are a part of his flock. They listen and obey. What about the adversaries in the first 5 verses? How are they described in the first 5 verses? Who are the bad guys? Robbers. Robbers and thieves. There's a slight difference between those two. Well, at least to me, I don't recognize the difference immediately. But thieves take things more in secret, by stealth. Robbers come and they use force. So you've got all kinds of people trying to take. Those are the adversaries in these first 5 verses. Now we might think, we might jump on the voice of these other shepherds, but that is not really his point here. We can make that point, that there are other voices, and people will listen to those other voices and not listen to Jesus, but the thieves and the robbers are the adversaries. So if there are other shepherds, what does that mean? If the thieves and the robbers are the adversaries, who are these other shepherds? Okay, they could be false teachers. Yeah, I think if we were to make the application to present day, the thieves and robbers get in. The shepherds come and speak to them. But really, in the church, only God can add a person to the church, right? You're not getting in to the church unless God adds you. You can't lie and sneak past God, but you can convince the rest of us, can't you? You can pull the wool over our eyes, so to speak, and fool us into thinking that you've got some wise words to say that are better or in addition to Christ, something that we should listen to. So we can make that type of application here. But as we think about Jesus making this point about these adversaries, he hasn't gotten to the point where he said he's the good shepherd yet. So when he's talking about these sheep, these different flocks, and these different shepherds, it's not necessarily at this point in his illustration that these are all different teachers, different messages, and different peoples. What he is saying is that in a big group of people, you will notice that they follow the one they listen to. Now, for Christ, we want to listen to him, don't we? So it's not necessarily yet the point that people are coming in and making these teachings, although the Pharisees would fit there and the false teachers would fit there. He's going to make that point in just a few verses. But right now, he's building up to, okay, there are people breaking in and trying to take. Again, another question, can anybody steal you away from Christ? No. Nobody can take you by force. But the Pharisees of Jesus' day were trying to force people to follow their own rules. The Pharisees and Sadducees were saying, if you don't follow what I think, this is how I separate the flock of the nation of Israel. I say you have to tithe your mint, and that's how I know you're a part of the right flock. Right? So they were trying to do the same thing false teachers do today. And that is a dangerous thing that we have to be careful of. What about how do the sheep recognize who they belong to? Not difficult. How do the sheep know? Yeah, his voice. Now there's a lot of application we can make there, right? What does it mean to know the shepherd's voice? How do we recognize the shepherd's voice? His words, okay? We've got to know what Jesus said, know how he lived, in order to know what he wants us to do in any and every situation we find ourselves in, right? We might think we're facing some novel situation that Jesus never spoke to, but if we are in his word enough, listening to his word, we will recognize what he wants us to do no matter what situation we face. It's about discernment, isn't it? The more time we spend in God's word, the easier it is to discern right from wrong. If we want to recognize the voice of our good shepherd, then we need to be spending time in his word so that we can recognize what direction he would have us go in. Any more thoughts or comments on that? Jesus speaks to us through his word. He calls to us. He calls us by name. Is that what that verse said? He calls his own sheep by name. Verse 3 there. What do you think about that? Well, let me see. I think I have a slide that asks this question. What significance do you find in the shepherd calling the sheep by name? Yeah. He recognizes us. It's incumbent upon us to recognize the Savior. He already knows who we are. He's calling his flock by name. Now, God has called, you might say, everyone. He's done what has to happen in order for every person on earth to be saved. But when we see the people who are saved referenced in Scripture, they are called the ones who are called. They are the ones who answer God's call. So as Jesus goes and calls by name those he recognizes, he's recognizing the ones who recognize him. There's relationship here between Jesus and his followers, between the shepherd and his sheep. Those who follow the voice of Jesus are going to be easily recognized from those who don't recognize him. And that's going to become more apparent amongst the sheep. We are going to begin to realize, well, that sheep isn't doing what the shepherd is asking. That shepherd isn't going where the shepherd calls. That sheep isn't going where the shepherd calls. We too are going to begin to recognize these things. Although our focus remains on the shepherd, we need to realize that amongst us there may be someone who is like a false teacher, or a sheep who has strayed. And what does Jesus give the church? We call them elders, pastors. Pastors as shepherds. Same role. Elders, shepherds, bishops, presbyters. Lots of different descriptions for the same role. Overseer. Jesus gives the church shepherds to watch out for those sheep who might go astray, who might not be listening, recognizing Jesus' voice when he calls. We need to understand that as sheep, we need to follow the good shepherd, and the good shepherd has also provided shepherds for our local family here. Let's see. Let's look at the next few verses here. Verse 7 through 10. Would somebody like to read that for me?
Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. Anyone enters through me, he will be saved, and I will go in and out and find pasture. Thief comes only to steal and to kill and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it in abundance.
Good. Okay, so remember, he's talking about himself as a door. And we keep going back and forth between shepherd and the shepherd calling his sheep. But in these verses, he's saying, I'm the door. What's the difference between a door and a shepherd? I know you can tell the difference between a door and a shepherd. What does a door do? It provides entrance or exit, access. Sorry? Somebody over here said something. Entrance, what else? A boundary, which is security. All right. Door does those things. Invitation. A door, yeah. If you're trapped in a room without doors, you see that door, you're thinking, that's my way, that's my way, that's my access. What else? You think of anything else about a door? Protection. Yeah, keep things from coming through. You know, a door closes, right, and opens. So a door might protect as well. There's also a historical fact that out there in the country, you know, where he's talking about now, this door to the pen, a lot of times the shepherd himself would sit in the entrance to that pen and thereby become the door, making sure nothing that shouldn't come in gets in and none of the sheep get out. They can't do that because the shepherd is there, being himself the door. So there's still that similarity, that parallel. The shepherd is the door in that sense. But Jesus isn't saying, I'm the shepherd door. He's saying, I'm the door, which points to access to somewhere else, right? Somewhere that is not available without a door. Now, the sheep that are in this pen are sheep that belong to Jesus. And what he is saying is, I am the door. What does it mean that he says, I am the door and not I am a door? He's the only access, the only way, the only provision, which tells us something about Jesus. We need him. We need to make sure we recognize his voice because he's the only one that can provide us access. He goes into the sheepfold, he calls his own, he separates his own by calling out to them, he leads his own, and they, until they follow him, they are in the world without access to heaven. But when we follow Jesus, we have access to him. We have access to his flock. We have access to salvation, right? And that's the big thing that we all think about when we think about Jesus as a door. We have no means to get to heaven without Jesus providing that entrance into heaven. It's like that picture. I don't know that you've probably seen it. That there's a huge gap, a huge drop off between God on one side and man on the other. There's no way to get across this gap. And then in the picture, you see sad people on one side and God on the other. And then the next picture, there's a cross there in that gap, filling that gap so that man might get to God. Jesus is the door, right? He is the only way that we can have access to Jesus. What does he say in verse 9? If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go out and have pasture. How do we know Jesus' followers are those who listen and obey? We know they hear his voice, they recognize his voice. How do we know they obey it? The way they live, yeah, in our own lives, the way they live. What is there anything in this verse that points to that? The way these sheep are living? What would they do if they weren't going to obey the voice of the shepherd? Would they leave the pen? If they weren't gonna obey, they'd stay in the pen, wouldn't they? They wouldn't come when Jesus calls. They are listening, they are obeying the voice of their shepherd. That's what we need to do. We need to obey, and we will live the way that Christ wants us to when we recognize him as the shepherd and follow his lead. And what is he going to provide for us? Access. He says, we hear and we enter. Let's think about this today. How is Jesus a door today? It might be on your worksheet. There's a couple passages there. Ephesians 2:18, Hebrews 10:20. That tells us a couple of things. We mentioned salvation. We mentioned God. And maybe that's what these verses say. Ephesians 2:18, what does that say?
Through him we both have access by one Spirit.
Access in one Spirit to the Father. There it is. Jesus is the door. Through him we have access to the Father. What about Hebrews 10:20? Anybody got it?
By a new and living way opened for us through the curtain that is body.
All right. So the curtain is his body. We go through that, and what do we have? Something new, a new way, a living way, abundant life. Isn't that what Jesus is talking about? Life everlasting comes because of Jesus. When he says he's the door, he's referencing all of this access to our eternity. Everything that we hope for is because Jesus is the door. This is, a very short one, and I wanted to share with you a video. Is it going to work? It's not going to work. I can't see Dennis. Maybe he figured it out. No. Never mind. I won't share with you the video. Let's do this before I continue on here. Does anybody have any comments or questions regarding this? We are going to talk about the Good Shepherd, so don't worry about that. We're going to get to that next week. What about the door, Mickey?
Some denominations believe, say, I think Jesus never leave us, but I think he can leave him. In other words, you go in that door swing both ways.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah, our access is only through Jesus. You leave Jesus, you leave the access. You leave the way. Now, we are safe from those thieves and robbers in that they cannot take us out of God's hands. We have as much security as we will ever have following Jesus. We can choose to leave God's hands. I think 1 John talks about our getting forgiveness when we walk in the light. When you walk in the light. Where do we not have forgiveness? Outside the light. That's talking about Jesus. The door, the way. We're going to get to I am the way, the truth, and the life later, right? You step out of that way, stop following him, turn your back on him. I will say sometimes we have the idea of, okay, today I'm saved, I'm not saved. Back and forth and bounce, and that's not what we hear here. That's not what it's teaching either. It is teaching there is safety as you walk in the light. If that is what you are striving for, you're good. Don't worry about those mistakes. Grace takes care of that when you go to God, go to Christ, confess your sin. He's going to be faithful to remove that. You can trust him with that. There's no fear when you are walking in the light. The fear comes when you turn your back on him and walk your own way, because then you don't have access. You lose that. Good point. Anything else? All right, I think I did not answer at least one of those questions. What was it? Okay. How does God say he will bless the obedient in Deuteronomy 28, 1 through 6? What does verse 6 there say? Well, you can look at all 6 verses. But verse 6 in particular says, blessed you will be when you come in, and blessed you will be when you go out. Everything you do, in other words. Your life will be blessed when you follow him. Psalm 128:8 says, the Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth forevermore. That's that permanence that we have when we follow the shepherd. Psalm 23, 1 through 3. You probably never heard this before. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Jesus calls us to be his. That means we trust him, we recognize him. He wants us to know him so that we know how to live like him and become like him. What's going to happen if we follow Jesus' lead today? Romans 8, 28 through 30. Well, 29 tells us we'll be conformed to his image. As Christians, that's what we want to be. We want to be like Christ. And as we follow him, that's what's going to happen. I keep looking up at the clock. That's right. We're not alone in this. We have the strength of the Spirit, and we know of that and how it works from the Word. He is telling us how to live. He's telling us that we can be confident all the time, and all we have to do is trust that Spirit and His lead. That was the second bell. Any more comments or questions? What I do wrong? Hey, sheep people, what I do wrong? Nothing. They'll tell me later. All right. Thanks for your attention.